On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin, the iron-fisted ruler of the Soviet Union, breathed his last. His death marked the end of an era defined by his absolute control and unyielding authority. His death plunged the nation into mourning, a carefully orchestrated display of grief for a man who had reshaped their world. The Soviet state ensured that the mourning was both public and profound, reflecting the gravity of the moment. Millions lined the streets of Moscow to pay their respects as his body lay in state in the Hall of Columns. The sheer number of mourners was a testament to the impact Stalin had on the Soviet populace. This grand funeral, a spectacle designed to cement his image in the annals of history, marked the end of an era. The elaborate ceremonies were meant to immortalize him as a larger-than-life figure. Yet beneath the facade of national mourning, a sense of relief, of fear-lifting, rippled through the country. For many, Stalin's death signaled the end of a period of intense repression and terror. Stalin's reign, spanning nearly 3 decades, had been one of absolute power, marked by terror and unimaginable suffering. His policies and purges had left deep scars on the nation. Millions had perished under his brutal regime, victims of forced labor, systematic starvation, and relentless purges. The human cost of his rule was staggering and left a lasting legacy of pain. The outpouring of grief was real, for Stalin had become synonymous with the Soviet Union itself. His image was deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness of the people. But beneath the surface lay the silent stories of those who had endured unspeakable horrors. These stories were often hidden, suppressed by the state to maintain the myth of Stalin's infallibility. Their voices, silenced for decades, would eventually emerge, revealing the true legacy of the man hailed as the Man of Steel. The truth about his reign would slowly come to light, reshaping the narrative of his rule.
2.
Stalin's rise to power was a product of cunning political maneuvering and ruthless ambition. In the aftermath of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, he consolidated his authority within the Communist Party, eventually outmaneuvering rivals like Leon Trotsky. He promised a socialist utopia, a society of equality and prosperity for all. His early years in power saw rapid industrialization and collectivization of agriculture, aimed at transforming the Soviet Union into a modern industrial power. But these policies came at a tremendous human cost. The forced collectivization of farms, in particular, led to widespread famine and resistance, particularly in Ukraine. The Holodomor, a man-made famine that ravaged Ukraine from 1932 to 1933, stands as a chilling testament to the brutality of Stalin's regime. Driven by a desire to crush Ukrainian nationalism and resistance to collectivization, Stalin's policies deliberately engineered a famine that claimed millions of lives. Grain was confiscated from Ukrainian peasants, leaving them to starve to death in their homes and villages. The world watched in horror as reports of cannibalism emerged from the breadbasket of Europe. The Holodomor remains a deeply sensitive issue, a stark reminder of the human cost of Stalin's pursuit of absolute control. Section 4. The Stalin Canal, a monument to suffering. Another grim symbol of Stalin's rule is the White Sea-Baltic Canal, a 141-mile waterway connecting the White Sea to the Baltic Sea. This canal was meant to be a testament to Soviet ingenuity and ambition. Built between 1931 and 1933, this ambitious project was intended to showcase the power of Soviet engineering and the strength of its people. It was a massive undertaking that required immense resources and manpower. However, the canal was constructed at a horrifying human cost. The conditions were brutal and unforgiving. Hundreds of thousands of Gulag prisoners, declared enemies of the people, were forced to work on the project under inhumane conditions. These prisoners were often political dissidents or those accused of minor crimes. Poorly fed, clothed, and lacking even basic tools, they toiled and died in droves. The lack of proper equipment made their work even more grueling. The mortality rate was staggering, with tens of thousands perishing from disease, starvation, and overwork. The canal stands as a somber reminder of the suffering endured by so many. Section 5. The Great Terror, Shadows of Fear. The late 1930s witnessed the peak of Stalin's paranoia and brutality. This was a time when fear and suspicion permeated every corner of Soviet life. Driven by a desire to eliminate any potential threats to his power, he unleashed the Great Terror, a period of mass purges that targeted anyone perceived as disloyal or a threat. No one was safe from Stalin's reach. Millions were arrested, tortured, and sent to the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps scattered across the Soviet Union. These camps became synonymous with suffering and death, The purges extended to all levels of Soviet society, from high-ranking party officials and military leaders to artists, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens. The reach of Stalin's terror was all-encompassing. The fear was palpable. As neighbors denounced neighbors and families were torn apart. Trust was a rare commodity in those dark times. The Great Terror left an indelible scar on Soviet society, creating a climate of fear and suspicion that lingered for decades. The echoes of this period would be felt long after Stalin's death.